very much, Anne. Very, very excited to be up here in rainy Lancashire, Preston, and really, really excited to be able to share with you a little bit on what happens next and the power of STEM. So you heard there a little bit of my bio, lots of the different things that I've done in my life so far, but all of those things came from a curiosity, which I'm sure many of you here in the room have. That's why you're mathematicians. It's about wanting to know why things are the way that they are. My curiosity started a little bit younger than most of us in this room, aged about 4 years old. And some of you in the room will remember VCR players. A couple of you won't know what I'm talking about. We had them before Netflix, that we had before Blu-ray, that we had before DVDs. And I remember being incredibly curious about how the VCR player worked. We had stacks of cassette tapes from maybe weddings, Lion King, and you just had a sticker that had it described on the outside. And I never knew how Timon and Pumbaa came out from a sticker that just had Nala and Simba on it. So I set about taking apart the VCR player, because that's what you do when you want to understand how things work. And I've not looked back since. Now, it's not just about curiosity for me, it's also about our capacity to solve problems, which of course is what we do all the time. Everything is a problem sheet, right, that we have as mathematicians. And following this pathway, following this line, has meant that I've ended up in lots of weird and wonderful places and spaces. So you heard there from Jan a little bit of what I've been up to professionally, but there's lots of places I would never have imagined, guessed, or even planned that I'd end up in because of my pursuit of knowledge, but more particularly maths and computer science. Places like having my own podcast with the Evening Standard, getting to meet Her Late Majesty the Queen at Buckingham Palace, my book that you heard about just then, but also doing this little show called Countdown on Channel 4 as the arithmetician for about 60 episodes while Rachel Riley was off on maternity leave. And for me, it's been such a fascinating journey to go on. I would have never planned or maybe imagined that this what would come next, as someone that loved the maths, loved the logic, loved the computer science and the determinism, and had other things that I imagined for myself. So a little bit about me and those STEM choices. I'm very similar to many of you in the room. Maths, computer science, these STEM subjects was something I chose the whole way along. This is me with my little sister in East London, just before I'd done those 2 GCSEs in primary school. The second photo is me in my secondary school uniform, which I always love to show, especially when I go to schools, because I hated my uniform, and I'm thankful every single morning that I don't have to put it on again. The third, Jan will recognise, this is me graduating with my Masters from Oxford at Keble in Maths and Computer Science. And then the fourth image is me just slightly younger in my career, with slightly less grey hair. As a technologist, I went off and started on a grad scheme in the city, working on technology for a big universal bank. But like many of you, STEM was the choice that I kept on making, I kept on choosing, I kept on coming back to. And I think we're in many ways quite fortunate in this country, the provision that we have and are continuing to have of these subjects. STEM is encompassing quite a lot of different fields. But what excites me even more so now that I'm older and a little bit wiser is actually something that we call STEAM. And this is including arts as part of that toolkit that we have for building the future, for being innovative and for truly solving problems. I include this image, actually. This is May Britt Moser, who was a Nobel Prize winner from a couple of years back in chemistry. And she's got synapses, some of you will recognise, as part of her dresses. That was part of the research and the work that she'd done. But this image always ends up reminding me of the research, the stats, the kind of number crunching that they've done, that you're much more likely to be a Nobel Prize winning scientist if you've engaged with the arts as part of your upbringing. So I'll say that one more time. You're much more likely to win a Nobel Prize in the sciences if you've engaged with the arts, had some sort of form of arts training in your upbringing. Which I think is an interesting and important thing for us to reflect on, those of us that do choose STEM, or those of us that make great decisions early on in life and have this as our chosen subjects, that actually there's a lot of value in the additive, adding other things into that mix. There's a lot of innovation that ends up coming out as a result of embracing those subjects, and so we shouldn't leave them behind. And so as Jan has just mentioned, I've been running STEMettes, a non-profit, for the last 10 years. We work with girls, young women and young non-binary folks, encouraging, engaging, connecting them into all that STEM and STEAM have to offer across industry, academia and entrepreneurship. And so I wanted to maybe reflect a little bit on what the future looks like. We start with young people as young as 5 years old. 5 is a really young age, right? I don't know how many of you here remember being 5. But the world is your oyster, right? There's a lot of things that will have changed in the world since you were 5, and that's true for everybody in this room. That's not just about the age that you are now. And so I often end up getting to reflect on what is it that I'm encouraging young people to do? What is it that they might be operating in? Where might they be able to apply their maths, apply some of that creativity, and what kind of what society will they be solving problems in? I'm sure those of you who are in the school are being asked to think about your future all the time. And so I want you to kind of cast your minds a little bit further forward. For those of you who are not students in the school, maybe let's think beyond the next quarter or the next financial year, next academic year. How often do any of us get to reflect on the future and what happens next? Got a little bit of a visual aid here. Let's think maybe 30, 40, 50 years into the future. Wonder how many of us ever get to really try and think that far forward, or muse, or ponder where we might be, what might have happened, what our legacy might end up being. Those of us that may be studying the maths curriculum in 50 years' time, what would it look like versus what it looks like today? I don't know how many of you are imagining flying cars, Burj Khalifa looking kind of thing there in the middle, Guardians of the Galaxy-esque. You can't really do a tech talk these days without asking the AI what it looks like, so this is another version. Maybe one of these is 30 years in the future, one of these is 50 years in the future, according to DALL-E, so I'll let you decide which is which. But I've ended up becoming a little bit obsessed with what happens next. What is that world going to look like that we're all creating, researching, and innovating for? And another reference that some people in the room will get and others won't. In the 1980s, there was a great show called Knight Rider. Folks watched this guy called David Hasselhoff that was the main character. And he played a character called Michael, who had a car called Kit that he would talk to, which in the 1980s was a really far-fetched idea that you talk to an inanimate object. He wouldn't just talk to the car, but the car would understand what he was saying, and they were able to successfully fight crime together. Now in the 1980s, that was a really far-fetched science fiction kind of idea, but there's many of you here who probably talk to cars and talk to inanimate objects all the time. Anytime I really enjoyed actually during the pandemic, being on lockdown, getting to talk to people across the world and be a little bit mischievous and ordered loo roll using Alexas that folks had in their rooms. That was me, maybe not fighting crime using the technology, but causing a little bit of mischief. But it's quite interesting how something that the 1980s really wasn't that long ago, something that seems so science fiction then has become reality. And so actually I feel like as folks that are within this world, that are working within STEM, there's quite a lot of the future that we already know, we already see, we're probably already imagining. It's already here in many cases, it's just maybe unevenly distributed. Now, having chosen STEM, there are a lot of things that we're able to do that end up being within our remit. Technology, there we go, doing what technology does. Isn't it fantastic? Now, those of us who are working within STEM are quite fortunate actually to be able to have a lot of power, a lot of leverage, and a lot of influence over what happens next as a result of our research, as a result of our curiosity, and as a result of our innovation. There's a really great capacity that we have to solve problems, which, as I said, is one of my biggest drivers and why I'm still excited. Problems, being able to apply that allows us to be able to solve many problems. Countless examples that we have of recent STEM knowledge being able to do that. These are 3 girls of a team of 4 at a maker fair in Nigeria who have deployed some engineering, some science, a little bit of ingenuity. You can just about make up there at the bottom. This turns, I think, a litre of urine into 6 hours of electricity, which is a bizarre use for urine. I like to kind of talk about this sometimes in schools actually, because we spend a lot of time often in the loos, and with the way that the bills are at the moment, being able to convert something like that into something useful is definitely an upside. But there's lots of things that we're able to apply our research and our innovation to be able to solve. And so it's an exciting time to be within STEM, whether it's finding new antibiotics, whether it's helping folks work through legal cases by analysing old land registry records, whether it's having robo-lawyers that you can use to do your bidding, maybe in appealing parking tickets or unsubscribing from services that you no longer want or need. or whether, again, using this art and bringing that element in, it's in being able to create music. This is an example from Ava, which is the artificial intelligence virtual assistant. And I think this is the 150th anniversary of LUSoM. So I'll turn that down a little bit. This is a real orchestra, it's not deep fakes. They are playing a piece of music. It is human beings as well, not bots. But this piece of music has been composed by an artificial intelligence algorithm. It doesn't sound like chiptune or anything that's kind of super techno, but how fascinating to think what might be possible the more that we explore, that we create, and that we are able to delve into these technologies and what they're able to do. And so I wanted to talk today not just about your futures, but a little bit beyond. Right? A lot of this, most of this, in fact all of this is underpinned by mathematical concepts, by our knowledge and our research, our innovation within STEM, and being able to add these fields together, being able to collaborate across fields of knowledge, being able to use research and be able to apply it to things like Internet of Things, virtual reality, autonomous vehicles, and robotics. And so it's quite an exciting time, I think, to be stepping into STEM because of that future and what happens next. We are quite fortunate. In fact, when I graduated, the role that I wanted to do and that I stepped into is very different from what I ended up doing. Our roles, our opportunities, the spaces, the fields that we're able to study are expanding every day. And so actually I think there's something exciting about being someone that's chosen STEM and has this as a basis for what happens next and how much you are going to be able to drive and influence what happens next. How much the decisions that you're making now, and those of us in industry and you as students, are going to impact what 50 years, what that landscape, what that cityscape looks like 50 years into the future. There are clues, there are hints. So there's a couple of ideas I wanted to plant in your head that you might take up as research projects, you might end up seeing in your academic careers or in your industry careers or as entrepreneurs. To maybe color in maybe a little bit about what that future could be. We've got digital therapeutics on the left-hand side of this slide. This is us using software and games to help treat mental disorders preventatively and also after the fact. There's a whole genome sequencing project going on actually in the south of the UK that over the next couple of years is going to try and sequence the entire genome of 100,000 babies, which might allow us to understand a little bit more about that population, about medical conditions as they come up, but even just who we are as human beings. We're currently testing and researching into brain-computer interfaces. That sounds scary, sounds weird and wonderful, almost in the way that talking to kids to solve crime sounded weird and wonderful, but might allow folks to have more autonomy and mobility in their later years if they're dealing with neurological conditions. We also have telerobotics. This is robots the size of DNA that we might be able to have within our bodies to help solve problems and help folks. We're also using technology to help us plan better. This is another actually gaming related example at the Royal College of Art, getting folks to explore pharmacies in gameplay that gets fed into, again, another algorithm that helps folks run through and cycle through by optimum ways to lay out pharmacies and other public services that allows us to reclaim space in the middle of our cities for use in disaster scenarios and also for emergency spaces for families to live in. 3D scanning your body in order to have custom-built clothes. Maybe instead of traveling with your suitcase, you're able to print a new set of clothes on your wardrobe when you head over to the other side. Or you might be able to refactor clothes to help with someone else to build up sustainability and ensure that there's no waste. We've got statistical analysis that's allowing us to anticipate incidents in different workplaces and different public spaces. So to do kind of incident predictions before they happen, which might help with health and safety. Driverless vehicles might lead to driverless logistics and driverless lorries, And then the right-hand side, this is me. I don't know what I was thinking when I was putting these slides together, but this is the idea of kind of 3D printing being used to do local manufacturing. So rather than having to find custom items or order things from far off, you might be able to pull up a design, ask your AI-enabled CAD to design you, I don't know, I think this was a home computer chair shaped like a horse. If that's what, tickles your fancy. Some people might be horse riders here. That's something you might be able to do and have that locally manufactured to your taste and to your liking. Final one, I was talking earlier about 3D scanning, and printing clothes. This is a real research project as well from the Royal College of Art at the moment, of folks being able to compost clothing materials and then being able to grow and generate new materials. So in the same way that you might compost at home and kind of able to grow your vegetables, you might be able to grow a pair of jeans, probably within the next 40 years, because of research and innovation that we're doing at the moment. And just in case you can't tell, I've used AI to generate most of these images, in fact all of these images, none of them, of course, are real, they're all part of our imagination, but this was what I asked for a denim plant. It looks like a growing denim. There we go. So there's lots that's possible, lots that's on the horizon, lots that we could have. But I wanted to issue a word of warning, and I think the earlier we tap into this, the better. The better for our legacy as folks in this space, but the better for the rest of society, of course, benefit and lose out from the innovation, the research, and the work that we do. And it's a big part of the reason why I run STEMets, actually. There's a lesson that we continually forget or are continually having to learn as we build innovation, as we work in this space, and as we explore what could come next. And it's shown through the 4 examples on this slide that I'm going to run through very quickly. Top left is me, yes, a little bit younger, slightly different hair, stood next to my mate John, who was the voice of Siri up until version iOS 8. So if you have the male English voice, it was John, obviously not in your phone, you all know that here. There's voice recognition technology, and John was the voice actor that led himself and read back the phonetics. And so if you were talking to Siri, it was almost John's voice that you were hearing back. Now Siri and voice recognition, and we spoke about this quite a lot actually when I was at Oxford, Stephen Cameron, I think it was natural language processing was his thing. We've been working on for decades voice recognition technology. Maybe or maybe not inspired by Knight Rider and KIT, but early versions of voice recognition, it's taken a while actually for it to take off, where it has become so ubiquitous that we've got voice-activated systems everywhere. Now, early folks who built these technologies forgot that different types of people have different voices. I know we're in Lancaster and Preston. Are there any Scots or Irish folk in the room with a beautiful, excellent Scottish or Irish accent? We're looking around quizzically. They haven't made it to Preston yet. There is a great video on YouTube called 2 Scots in a voice-activated elevator. Spoiler alert, they go nowhere. There's a lot of 11 being shouted. But it's an interesting thing to consider that we worked on these algorithms, and a lot of work, had a lot of input, a lot of thinking, a lot of funding gone into this. But actually we ended up forgetting about particular demographics. With this example, it was the Scots and the Irish, who till today, Siri doesn't understand them when they speak into Siri. And you have to ask yourselves the question, as responsible, smart folks working in STEM, who predated who? Who came first, the voice recognition or the Scots? Right? And why were they not considered? Why do they not deserve to be able to talk to Alexa and order loo roll at great distances? The second example, if any of you have ever read Invisible Women, you'll be familiar with this, is seatbelts and airbags, which of course we had. No one here will remember. We went from horses to cars at one point, lots of accidents on the road, and so we solve the problem for us, right? Create a safety device for folks as they're travelling as they need to in these. We built seatbelts and airbags, early versions of which killed women and children because we forgot that women and children are built slightly differently from who they had in mind. And we still have this today, and there's no reason why we couldn't solve this from alumni that we've got here in the room, that our safety standards are based on 50th percentile male, which you here as an audience will know what that means, which is very, very comforting for me. But actually there are a lot of folks who are not 50th percentile male, a lot of folks who are 98th percentile male, a couple people are 2nd percentile male, there are also people who are not male. 2023, who'd have known? And so even though it's mandatory for me to use a seatbelt when I'm traveling in cars, possibly I've never used a seatbelt correctly in my life because I'm kind of not distributed or built that way. My third example, I love talking about this on stage at technology conferences. It's one of my favourite things to do. Periods, 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 menopause, periods. Don't talk about them often enough. For those of you that are embarrassed by them, imagine having them. Really annoying, really frustrating. They've been around for a very, very long time. Every couple of years, the tech industry discovers the period for the very first time. And we get this feature, we get a big bang, we get a big release. I won't name them because this is being recorded. But 4 years ago, there was a particular health tech company that discovered the period for the very first time. They built this feature, they do fitness bands. They built this feature and they released it out to anyone that had one of these periods that they just discovered to be able to use. And they were only able to track 10 days of their period. And some of you are sat here thinking, why is she talking about periods? When is she going to stop? And there are a couple of you that are wondering, 10 days of a period? Right? And this is the kind of the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't matter whether you know about a period or you don't. You'd imagine a health tech company 4 years ago, they'd have had a couple of people that would have met some people that have had a period before in their lives. And so they'd have been able to build a feature that solves that problem rather than creating a whole other problem. And so it's important, as we're applying our STEM, as we're considering, as we're doing our research, as we're looking into our innovation, that we're thinking wider than ourselves and our experiences and our perspectives, because we're not doing this research purely for us, although with pure maths often it does very much feel like it's just you in your own world, and I miss it often, never have to step out into the real world. But actually so much of what we do ends up being used, ends up being leveraged. And so I think it's worth considering that difference, worth considering who else you might be forgetting, and maybe who you should be talking to. Least of all, if you're in a health tech company building a period tracker, it'd be great if you could talk to someone that's ever met anyone that's had a period before. And my final example is a little bit more serious, and this is one that I really hope, maybe if there's nothing else that folks take away, I'm hoping this is one that you do. Again, this is being recorded, so this is an example from a company that many of you will recognise that rhymes with Google. And this is some image recognition from a couple of years ago. And many of us will be familiar with image recognition, facial recognition, heart print recognition is now here with us. Lots of issues I'm sure you will have seen and heard in the headlines. But this image recognition software that's deployed to loads of folks that have this software on their phones has been able to successfully identify skyscrapers, successfully identify airplanes, successfully identify cars. Yes, that is a bike. No, they are not gorillas. And yes, that is a graduation. And this is a real example, it's a real life example from someone's phone. This is something that ended up happening kind of out in real life with a real user that had real images from their real life that ended up being analysed by this algorithm. Their resolution in this case when this happened was to remove the tag gorillas from the system. Which I know you're all here, you're all smart. I know many of you in this room could think of something slightly better to do than to just remove the tag. But if we think of what we're building, if we think of our legacy, if we think of that 50 years down the line, these small issues, this small forgetting of particular types of people, ends up adding and ends up being multiplied. If you think of, I don't know, autonomous vehicles having to analyse what they're seeing on the road as we're driving along, if you're not able to accurately analyse and recognise whether it's a bike, whether it's a graduation, an airplane or a gorilla, then what is going to be the knock-on effect of us just simply forgetting that certain people exist? And so it's really, really important. It's a big part of why I run my organisation, STEMets. Because unfortunately, the time has gone that we are just studying maths and computer science for the sake of just studying it. Right? There are implications for a lot of what we do now. This is our time, it's no longer niche. I remember a time when it was niche, there's this internet thing that folks were talking about, right? Or this AI hype, I guess we can say. But all of this underpinned by the maths that we're doing, the research that we're doing, the innovation, the roles that you will have that don't exist at the moment. It's in all of our hands as folks in this STEM space and in this STEAM space to keep our eyes on the prize, keep our eyes on what happens next, and make sure that we act accordingly. Thank you very much.